This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm your host, Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, is Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
Hope everyone's doing well. We have a great show for you today. Adam is going to explore what animals see when they watch TV.
That's right.
I assume a list of their favorite shows.
Mm-hmm.
But first, I'm going to talk to you about evolution and whether Lamarck was that wrong. Who? What? Imagine a world where giraffes used to have short necks. How did they evolve to have such long necks? Well, one of the earliest theories to explain this came from a man named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Those who have little exposure to the theory of evolution know that it was Charles Darwin's dangerous idea of life forms changing over time due to natural selection that was the key insight that revolutionized our understanding of biology. They also tend to know that Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was also a biologist, and he supported the idea of characteristics acquired during an organism's lifetime get passed on, and that he was wrong. But does Lamarck deserve a bit better than being remembered simply as the guy who was wrong? I think so, and that's what this segment is about.
Great.
And of course, an excuse to talk about evolution. So let's first give you an overview of Lamarck's life. Jean-Baptiste Pierre-Antoine Dominé Chevalier de Lamarck was born August 1st. Yeah, Adam can correct all my French butchery.
It's not bad. It's good.
I'll just live it up. August 1st, 1744 in Byzantine, Picardy, France. He was the youngest of 11 children in a family of minor nobility.
Wow.
Yeah, minor nobility. This is funny.
Minor nobility split in 11 ways.
That's what made it so minor. His father intended for him to join the clergy, as one did back in the 1700s, but Lamarck initially pursued a military career, joining the French army at the age of 17. He served in the Pomeranian War, which was, of course, for the dogs, where he was recognized for his bravery. However, an injury forced him to leave the military, leading him to shift his focus to science. This injury was a turning point in his life, pushing him towards the study of medicine and botany. Thanks, injury. Before we get to Lamarck's contributions to biology, I want to provide some context about the world he grew up in. During his lifetime, 1744 to 1829, the prevailing belief among many natural philosophers and theologians was that the Earth was relatively young, around 6,000 years old. This estimate was based on biblical chronology, particularly the genealogies in the book of Genesis. This is, I think, James Ussher saying 4004 BC is when everything began. Now, not everyone agreed with this, though. For example, in the late 1700s, the Comte de Buffon conducted experiments on the cooling of iron spheres to estimate the Earth's age and suggested it could be much older, possibly tens of thousands of years. Radical, I know.
Interesting.
There was also James Hutton, often considered the father of modern geology. Hutton proposed the theory of uniformitarianism, which posited that the Earth's features were shaped by continuous and uniform processes over a long period. This implied that the Earth was much older than previously thought. Note, this was not plate tectonics, which wasn't actually accepted until the 1960s.
So what's the alternative? That the, Earth started out fully baked? Kind of shaped like
pretty
it
much
is now?
Yep. Well, if God would create something perfect, and it would be unchanging. That's like a prevailing belief, right?
If you created something perfect, it would look a little different. Think.
It looked better 200 years ago. Context. Now, to be fair, they could be the case where, it's been changing for 6,000 years,
Yeah, I guess.
I just really like the idea that it could be much older than previously thought, tens of thousands of years old. All right. And finally, in this short aside, we have Charles Lyell, and he built on Hutton's ideas. Lyell's work in the early 19th century further argued for an ancient Earth. Lyell's book, Principles of Geology, published in the 1830s, was highly influential and suggested that geological processes observed in the present day had been occurring for millions of years. For some more context, Lyell's book was very influential to Darwin, whose theory needed more time for changes to occur. That was one of Darwin's key concerns. I'm saying life forms change over time, but of course that takes a lot of time. And where is that time if you think the Earth is only tens or even hundreds of thousands of years old. Well, Lyell comes along, has the notion of deep time, which is, in this case, millions of years. Now, the actual age of the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, so they're not quite even close, but at least a step in the right direction of these sort of ideas and trying to understand how things are. Lyell's Principle of Zoology, note, did not come out until after Lamarck died, because he died in 1829, and Lyell's book came out in the 1830s.
So Lamarck was really dealing with a much younger planet where his theories may have seemed less ridiculous. Yeah.
Well, right. Or he just didn't have as much accepted context amongst the sort of zeitgeist amongst people.
Yeah.
So Lamarck himself, as a materialist, believed that the universe and the Earth were as eternal as matter, indicating that he thought the Earth was much older than the traditional biblical estimate. Now, of course, the Earth is not eternal. It's about 4.5 billion years old. But, well, how to compare this, right? In pure numeric terms, believing that the Earth is tens of thousands of years old is, of course, closer to 4.5 billion than 4.5 billion is to eternity. Right?
Let's use a logarithmic scale.
Yeah, I know,
Still
exactly.
Doesn't matter. Eternity is still infinite.
There you go. But in another way, 4.5 billion is closer, given how much time can't really be felt by people, only thought about. The point is, regardless, Lamarck gets some credit for thinking that the Earth is much older than prevailing orthodoxy did. Right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you think tens of thousands? I think eternal. Of course, like, how long is eternity? Well, right, who knows about that? Okay, so what about biology? That's the whole point of this segment. Lamarck made significant contributions to the classification of invertebrates. He was the first to separate crustaceans, arachnids, and annelids from insects. Bet you didn't know that, Adam.
Oh, cool.
He also coined the term biology to describe the study of living organisms.
Wow. That's a big one.
Someone was going to fact check that one, I'm sure. His work in taxonomy helped lay the foundation for the modern classification system used in biology today. Like, lay the foundation is some nice language, though, right? It's very, very vague there. But Lamarck is best known for his theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics, often summarized as use and disuse. He proposed that organisms could pass on traits acquired during their lifetime to their offspring. Let's go back to those giraffes. So let's think about a group of organisms that were precursors to giraffes. And some of them are stretching their necks to reach leaves on trees. And the more they stretch their necks, the more they can eat, which gives them sustenance and energy. And that validates the action of stretching their necks. So giraffes stretch their necks to reach higher leaves, and then this trait is inherited by their descendants. This idea was revolutionary at the time, as it suggested that species were not fixed and could change over time.
Yeah.
So while we look at this now and think, well, that's not really true, again, the making progress in ideas, the fact that species could change at all was a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Now, sort of summarizing, paraphrasing a bit of Wikipedia, while he was working on hydrogeology, or hydrogeologie for the French, in 1802, Lamarck had the idea to apply the principle of erosion to biology. Oh. This led him to the basic principle of evolution. And you never know where insights are going to come from, right?
Yeah.
So this led Lamarck to the basic principle of evolution as he saw it, which saw the fluids in organs inheriting more complex forms and functions, thus passing on these traits to the organism's descendants. Right? I haven't personally thought how erosion is similar, but again, if you're just thinking of change over time in the broad sense, and how does that happen, these are the main insights we're dealing with. Although Lamarck was not the first thinker to advocate organic evolution, he was the first to develop a truly coherent evolutionary theory. He outlined his theories regarding evolution first in his Florio lecture of 1800, and then in 3 published works. There's one in 1802, there's this major work, Philosophie zoologique, in 1809, and in 7 volumes, Histoire naturelle des animaux sans vertébrés. So, natural history of invertebrates. 7 volumes. I mean, Darwin studied barnacles for like a decade too. These guys, just like, also this, Darwin had like, I don't know, like 10 kids and he had like 11 kids. I don't know. It's just interesting how these things go on. And what they're
11. So that's quite a dilution of the minor nobility.
Well, we need our generation to play the other one in some sort of cricket match. Lamarck employed several mechanisms as drivers of evolution, drawn from the common knowledge of his day and from his own belief in the chemistry before Lavoisier. He used these mechanisms to explain the 2 forces he saw as constituting evolution: a force driving animals from simple to complex forms, and a force adapting animals to their local environments and differentiating them from each other. He believed that these forces must be explained as a necessary consequence of basic physical principles, favoring a materialistic attitude towards biology. So this is remarkable and revolutionary for the time, right? You can sort of see the glimpses of where we are now, and someone sort of saying these things way back then. Put another way, Lamarck's contribution to evolutionary theory consisted of the first truly cohesive theory of biological evolution, in which an alchemical complexifying force, that is a bit mystical, it is true, drove organisms up a ladder of complexity, and a second environmental force adapting them to local environments through use and disuse of characteristics, differentiating them from other organisms. Was he correct? No. But when thinking about increasing humanity's understanding of the world, it was a very useful contribution, both for what it got right, what it got wrong, and what it was willing to challenge in terms of conventional orthodoxy. The modern era generally remembers Lamarck for a theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics, called Lamarckism, or soft inheritance, or use and disuse theory. However, the idea of soft inheritance long antedates him. It came before him, formed only a small element of his theory of evolution, and was in his time accepted by many natural historians.
Oh, I did not realize.
So, yeah, he was wrong, but so were a lot of people.
Yeah.
And again, other people are thinking species never change at all. So, let's give them some credit.
The wrongness was the prevailing scientific view here.
Well, people were wrong 300 years ago, 300 years ago. Also, many neglect to mention that good old Charles Darwin himself allowed for a role for use and disuse as an evolutionary mechanism subsidiary to natural selection, most often in respect of disuse. Further, we know Darwin praised Lamarck for, quote, the eminent service of arousing attention to the probability of all change in the organic world being the result of law, not miraculous interposition. The natural change of organisms over time. By the way, just because I haven't clarified it so far, why Lamarck is wrong is because what an organism does in their lifetime, how they might stretch their neck, how they might build their muscles, these do not affect your DNA. And the DNA is what is passed on to your offspring. This is why you cannot acquire characteristics and pass them on in this way. Surely, throughout your lifetime, you can acquire characteristics. That's how people change their body type or whatever, you get smarter or not over time. That said, it just doesn't work that way. You can't affect the DNA in the germline that way. Now, you can get radiation in various ways to damage your DNA, especially with our current technology. But in the past, it's not that easy to damage DNA in a way that makes it easy to pass on, aside from overt disease.
And that DNA will not reflect the change that is occurring in your body.
Because they're largely protected in different ways within the cell and how our sexual reproduction works and how replication occurs. Now, again, back then, they didn't have the germ theory of disease, not really. They didn't have DNA as a concept. That's also why Darwin couldn't really make advancements in his own theory. He didn't fully understand genetics in that way, and they didn't have it at the time. So again, pretty remarkable contributions given that they don't have these basic things, and a little bit understandable where if you see an adult who gets really strong over time, then their child seems to also get strong. You don't understand it's the underlying nature of the ability to build muscle, for example. That could be a case there.
Well, yeah, when you really don't know what the mechanism of passing on a trait from parent to child is. I think Darwin, he didn't know what DNA was, but he did sort of suppose there was some mechanism like genes that was there, but yeah, you take a lot for granted and you don't know, right?
Yes, they knew something was being passed on, clearly. The selective breeding of pigeons for certain traits and even dogs were used as key examples in Darwin's book on the origin of species, which clearly shows that some people, again, at the sort of phenotype, the characteristic that you can see level, if you want an organism to look like this, you match it with another one and then you can get certain dogs or pigeons or plants, right? So they had that.
Blonde parents have blonde kids, blue-eyed parents have blue-eyed kids. It's not always happening, but you could easily observe those in the population.
But then why do they sometimes have brown eyes? Well, dominant recessive alleles, right? That comes in. Okay, so if we fast forward from the 1800s to our present day, some aspects of Lamarck's theories have found potential relevance in the study of epigenetics. Epigenetics explores how environmental factors can affect gene expression, not necessarily the DNA itself, right? And some modern scientists see parallels with Lamarck's ideas about acquired characteristics. But this is under debate, and not really what Lamarck meant during his lifetime. Of course, we can't ask him. There's also the further complication, certainly an opinion I hold, that many people misunderstand what transgenerational epigenetics means and how it works. So I'm not going to get into that because I think it's very complicated and it's better to have biologists talk about these things. But even then, I know some biologists like, well, what are you guys talking about? They disagree with each other. So it gets complicated very fast. Okay, so in conclusion, what's the legacy? What's the impact about this man? Lamarck's ideas were initially overshadowed by Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection, which provided a more robust mechanism for evolution. However, Lamarck's work was crucial in sparking interest and debate in the field of evolutionary biology. His contributions to science were groundbreaking, even if they were not fully appreciated in his time. His theory of evolution, though flawed, was a crucial step in the development of evolutionary biology, and his work laid the foundation for future scientists to build upon, like Charles Darwin.
Very interesting. And I wonder if, in this vast universe of ours, if there are forms of life that do reproduce and inherit using a Lamarckian type of mechanism. Obviously, it wouldn't be DNA, or it wouldn't be anything like some sort of molecule or code which encodes sort of the recipe for a human or a life form. But I wonder if that could exist. Maybe I'd have to think about the biology of it a bit. And then from that, you think, like, if it did exist, like, what would that lead to, right? I feel like there would probably be atrophy of certain things very quickly in species, and there would be an acquiring and modification of traits that would happen very quickly amongst, like, successive generations, and that might seem very chaotic, but I don't know, makes you wonder. You know?
That is an interesting question. Yeah. So my first thought was whether the way we currently have it, sexual reproduction, right? Because plants reproduce asexually, humans are sexual, and they mix through good old mitosis and the splitting of things and so on. Is it the case that it works that way for protective reasons? That it'd be very deleterious and problematic to do it another way, which could then just easily wipe out entire species, which is why they don't exist. This is obviously two non-biologists just guessing here.
Yeah.
I don't know how it would work either biologically. From what I understand, DNA is this sort of nice way of combining a certain number of pieces to get a number of different outputs, right? So you have 4 main parts that go together, and you get like 64 combos, whatever it is, to code for proteins and so on. So is there a world where you're kind of coding for proteins and that allows for rapid development of acquired characteristics? That seems weird. Now, that said, since we know I'm a fan of AI stuff, if you think about it computationally, then, of course, you have some sort of organism which is mostly in silicon in some way, digital, and they are acquiring characteristics, and they can just make a copy of themselves, which would immediately be, of course, transferred and passed on to the next quote-unquote generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So perhaps this, I mean, you could simulate that kind of life form and that kind of evolution, but yeah, perhaps it will occur in a sort of informational intelligence that gets created by us, and we'll see. Obviously, the speed of that evolution and the speed of those changes would be very fast compared to what we've experienced in the past. But yeah, I think that's part of it too, right? Like sexual reproduction and mutation and things like that. Like even the rate at which a human cell can undergo mutation can affect the rate at which changes can occur in a population. So I kind of assumed that biology has adapted itself to find an optimal rate of mutation so that we don't sort of acquire too many mutations or too few over, you know, the geological lifespans of the environments they're dealing with and the other species they're interacting with. So if all of a sudden something came in and had some Lamarckian evolution and was competing with something that had evolution by natural selection using DNA, like they wouldn't compete because one would be way too fast. So
yeah, the timelines.
Yeah.
Yep. It'd be, well, again, like competing with an AI, like, oh,
exactly.
you all just updated immediately because it's almost like a Tesla update. Like, oh, just it's sent out and now it has a new capability.
Yeah. So our natural selection is probably obsolete given other methods we'll have to modify ourselves and others. Right?
Got to be a whole range of sci-fi based on this, either novels or short stories. We'll Google it after the show.
Sure.
Good question, though. And now we turn to Adam, who will talk to us about animals watching television, where, given the short period of time for television, have animals evolved the ability to enjoy our favorite shows?
That would be interesting if they could. I'm not sure that's possible.
Yet.
Maybe. So I have lots of cats, as that may be evident from some of the segments I talk about sometimes. Some of them are sometimes distracted by the TV. I don't own dogs, but I've had family dogs. They sometimes would watch TV. And I wondered, what are they really seeing when they're staring at that screen? So I figured I might look into it.
Adam has been asked to do this segment for years.
Yeah. It keeps coming up, and every time I think about it, I'm like, oh, I should do that. Anecdotally, it seemed like back in the day when TVs were CRTs, so that's cathode ray tube, I got the impression that dogs didn't actually see what was going on TV. So while a cat or dog on TV would sometimes get the dog's attention, it wasn't clear that the image had anything to do with it. Rather, it seemed that it was the sound that got their attention. So in the living room in my parents' house, there was a TV in the middle of the wall, right? Slightly elevated, it's on a TV stand or whatever. And on the wall behind the TV was a painting of a boat, so it was hung on top of the TV. So their dog, when I was a teenager and young adult, the dog they had was a wire-haired Dachshund named Stumpy. Why do I mention it's a Dachshund? Because short feet, low to the ground. Okay, he was a bit special. Sometimes he would hear a dog bark on TV, and then he would start barking and growling, but he did not bark and growl at the TV. He barked at the painting. Okay, so I surmised, for whatever reason, that Stumpy couldn't see the image on the TV. He just sort of like, from his vantage point, the direction that the sound seemed to be coming from was the painting behind the TV. Same direction.
That's an interesting point, because if you're low to the ground, what's the image you'd see at that angle anyway?
I used to lie on the ground and watch that TV. And yes, the viewing angle of a CRT horizontally is okay. Vertically, it's so-so. Depends on the glare. For a CRT, I think it was kind of okay. Like, we'd sit on the couch on the side of the room and be like, yeah, it's okay. As for cats, well, cats are a bit weird. So maybe even if they could follow the plot of The Godfather, they wouldn't want us to know because it didn't give them a strategic advantage. It wouldn't get them food or anything like that. I don't know.
Yes, that sounds correct.
But I got the sense that they reacted to the sounds of a meowing cat or a bird, but not so much the image again, much like the dogs. So fast forward a few years, HD TVs became much more common. LED screens for computers became more common. From what I could tell, cats certainly seemed to track the mouse pointer on a computer monitor. They also followed images on early HD TVs. So I had a CRT projection TV. I think I got in like 2004. And I had cats that would track that. More recently, my cat Tigru always follows the mouse pointer on my computer screen. And he'll follow moving objects on my TV. So I think it's an OLED TV from like 2012. I think it's maybe 120 hertz. I'm not really sure. My brother's dog also seems to look at animals on the actual TV. So birds, dogs, whatever, looks at the actual image of the animal. I don't know exactly what kind of TV my parents have, but it's not that old, so it's probably got a high refresh rate. So what's the deal? What's going on? So simply put, we don't really know what animals see. We can't ask them, right? You can't be like, hey, here's an image on a TV and here's like a cardboard printed out picture of a circle. Is that the same thing? The dog wouldn't even understand what you're asking. So how does a TV work? Why does that illusion work for humans? And what can we infer about whether or not that would work on an animal? Depends on the TV. So an old CRT, it's not really a series of images, right? So there's this cathode ray tube. It shoots a beam at a screen one line at a time. So there are 480 lines on a TV in Canada. One field is 240 lines and it's drawn every 159.9 of a second, is roughly 1/60th. So the two fields make a full frame every 129.97 of a second, about 1/30th. So all this because the power infrastructure of alternating current is roughly 60 hertz. So in most of Europe, it's actually 50 hertz. So their TVs are closer to 25 frames per second instead of our 30.
And hertz is basically once per second.
So hertz is the number of times per second. So the TVs in Europe are closer to 25 frames per second, which is why their movies are sometimes slightly off pitch because they just kind of speed it up a bit. The human eye doesn't distinguish images which flicker at a rate faster than about 16 to 20 times a second. So these fields that go by every 60th of a second, or basically a full frame every 30th of a second, is more than enough to create the illusion of motion.
Additionally, fluorescent lights flicker. You just don't see it because it's happening very fast.
It's pretty hot, yeah. So a cheaper fluorescent light, you might notice it, or it could cause negative health impacts without you even realizing it. A movie is that's projection on something like an old 35mm projector is 24 frames per second. So again, this is more than enough to make it look like smooth motion to a human. You don't really see the flicker of that bulb. Then there's this whole thing about like video games running at 60 frames per second or higher rates than that. That's probably a whole other segment. I'm a bit skeptical about the importance some people put on frame rates, but I think there's probably a mechanism there. So
this isn't do cats play video games segment. This is what do they watch TV?
That's right. So CRT is basically just a line at a time. If you film a CRT with a high-speed camera, you don't even see a solid image getting gradually refreshed. You see a single dot zooming one line at a time across the screen. And our eye, it kind of like burns that image in. It's actually pretty cool to watch high-speed video of a CRT or other various kinds of TVs, but I can't really portray that in audio. But
so to your point, it's a high-speed camera observing it. Because if you
absolutely.
If you look at a so-called normal camera, you see the image of the TV, normal motion, so to speak, but then this wave slowly going through it from because top to bottom. That's
because the frame rate of your camera is very close to the frame rate of the TV. So if I've got, say, a phone that's got like a 30 frame per second video, and then the TV is like 29.97 frames per second, or that's full frames. It's actually 59.94, which is like close to a multiple of 2 of that 30. So that's why you see that very slow, gradual one, because that's like the kind of the difference there. Or if it's a movie, right? So the movie camera is going to be shooting at 24, and then maybe the TV is closer to 30. So then it's almost harder to make out because that's basically 6 frames per second difference. There's different, you can kind of do the math on different ratios, but it can make odd effects for sure. So if our eyes worked faster than they do, then the illusion on a TV wouldn't work. And we probably would never have invented TVs that weren't as effective anyway.
Well, you could make a faster TV.
Absolutely.
But then, you're right. Yes.
So what about dogs? The flicker fusion frequency for a dog, so that's how quickly the image needs to refresh for them not to notice that change, is something that we can't necessarily calculate with great accuracy, again, because we can't ask them like, hey, is this flickering, dog? And be like, woof, I don't know, where's my food? But their behavior suggests that it's much higher than ours, probably between 40 and 80 frames a second. I saw some other sources that said it's like 70 to 80, maybe a little higher. So a dog looks at an old CRT TV and it flickers. Can they see the image? Maybe, but they couldn't really make it out and rationalize it like if they were a person. So like Darren mentioned, sometimes you see footage of a TV and you see the lines going through and it looks weird. Well, you know that's not real. It's breaking your illusion. So the dog doesn't immediately see a TV maybe with a flicker ray that's really not looking normal and assume that it's an accurate representation of what it's showing. So maybe they can see some vague movement. The dog was intelligent enough, it would be able to say like, oh yeah, I know this is supposed to be a dog, but it's just like this weird repeating image and I don't really think it looks that much like a real dog.
I find the show rather underwhelming. Dog critics.
Like this little hobo is not what I thought it would be. So much to say, it breaks the illusion they don't think it's a real animal. So they won't think it's a real dog. If they hear it though, there's nothing about the sound that makes it not sound like a real cat or a real dog. So for a digital signal, we've got a sound signal which is reconstructed at something like 44.1 thousand samples a second. For like DVD or higher, it's like 48,000, something like that. So dogs hear higher frequencies than we do. So maybe if you like recorded a dog whistle on a TV and on a TV show and played it on a TV, you wouldn't be able to hear the whistling. But for the most part, the dog is still able to hear the frequencies within the range that humans do, and they can more or less assume that is a cat or a dog or a bird or whatever that sound is on the TV.
Yeah, we overlap with them such that they just have a wider,
Yeah. But Adam, my cat used to chase the mouse pointer on my old CRT computer monitor. What's that about?
Ken has mouse pointer.
So I don't know what the exact flicker fusion frequency of a cat is, but let's assume it's in the ballpark of that your dog has. So somewhere in the 40 to 80 range, maybe in the 70, 80 or higher. Well, computer monitors have a higher refresh rate than a TV. This varies based on your screen's resolution. So for example, if you have 800 by 600 resolution on an old CRT monitor, this would have a refresh rate of 155. So that's 155 hertz. It's much higher than a normal CRT TV. For a higher resolution of something like 1600 by 1200, it's quite high resolution for back in the day, you'll have a frequency of only 78 hertz, which is probably towards the limits of what a cat and dog might see, and it's actually closer to a TV. So your cat's ability to follow your mouse pointer on like a 1990s like CRT monitor probably depends on the resolution you set that screen to. But all to say, all of these are higher than a TV, so your cat is probably able to see at least some of those resolutions. And the dog would as well, but the dog's not going to jump up on your table and look at your computer monitor. And then there are more modern displays. So for a while, 60 hertz was like the standard, was the cool thing to have. The Hobbit movies were shot in 60 hertz, big thing at the time. I didn't see them in theaters, so I don't know what that looked like. It's not really that much better than an old CRT since they do 60 fields per second. But these TVs would have the entire image refreshed 60 times a second and progressive scan instead of interlaced. So for humans, at least, it looks a little better. A common minimum refresh rate for higher end LED TVs as the technology was getting better was 120 hertz, because 120 hertz is a multiple of both 30 and 24. And this quickly became more standard. So if you're watching a movie that's 24 frames per second, that was like shot in 24 frames per second, which almost all movies are, you can basically do 5 times each frame in a frequency of 120 hertz, and you accurately reproduce the experience of watching a movie at 24 frames per second.
Right, just to clarify, so if someone's imagining what this actually looks like, instead of 24 frames, you'd have 5 of the first frame, then 5 of the second frame, then 5 of the third frame, so you still have 24 different frames, 5, 5, 5, 5, which then adds up to the 120.
Mm-hmm. All in 1 second, which goes by in blink of an eye.
Eyes blink faster than 1 second. I'm just kidding.
Maybe I'm really tired and I'm blinking slowly.
Touche. You didn't say all eye blinks. You just said eye blink.
That's right. So if you have, say, a 60 hertz progressive scan screen, then you can't divide 60 by 24. So each frame needs to be repeated 2.5 times, which is impossible. You can't have like half a frame in this sense. So you basically do one frame twice, the next frame 3 times, then that next frame twice, and the next frame 3 times. So it still makes the illusion pretty well, but the result can be that as the movie pans, you'll notice like a slight jitter. And this is more obvious with basically normal TV when you watch like a 24 frames per second movie converted to like VHS or a standard TV signal on a 30 frames per second ish TV. When they pan, you see this kind of jittering motion. Now, again, for an old TV signal of 30 frames per second, if you multiply it by 4, you get 120. So each frame can be displayed 4 times. More accurately, a TV video signal is 60 fields per second, and that can actually be different instances in time. This is why like soaps and news and stuff like that, they look a little more fluid than when you watch like a TV show like that was adapted from film, that was a movie. But then you get other things like jaggies and interlacing artifacts and things like that you don't notice as well on a CRT, but you'll notice on a modern display if you watch old shows. All this to say your cat or dog, they can see a 60 hertz display better than an old CRT. They can see 120 hertz display as well as they probably can, probably as well as we can. And they would never notice the flicker of a 240 hertz TV either. It's just, it's perfect for them. So your dog can probably see your TV now. And it probably couldn't see your TV 25 years ago. So that's progress, I guess. But they still don't really seem to care. A TV has image and sound, but it doesn't have smell. Humans don't seem particularly bothered by the fact that a basketball game doesn't smell like a high school locker room. But dogs and cats have much stronger senses of smell than us. So if something doesn't have a smell, it may just seem that much less real to them. So what is this phantom image of a dog whose butt I can't even smell doing in my living room? Why even bother? And perhaps in a world run by dogs, we'd have these like 4DX technologies in living rooms where you can like smell whatever's on the TV. I don't even know how that would work, but
someone's working on it.
Or some dog scientists might be someday. If we merge with AI, why not merge our dogs with AI? Also worth noting is that dogs are dichromatic, so we've talked about this before on the show. They only have 2 kinds of cones in their eyes to detect colors, so they only see sort of blue and yellow. Cats are also dichromatic. Dogs usually like watching short clips that are less than 3 seconds, and they'll glance at a TV, but they won't sit there and stare at it for hours at a time like humans do. And I wonder what our cats or dogs think of us when we stare at this screen for hours on end. It must seem dull, or perhaps they don't, I don't know. Maybe they don't have these kind of sophisticated thoughts about us because I'm just anthropomorphizing their thinking of us.
It is interesting to think about what they would think. Like this, just like, what are you doing? There's no obvious reason, right? And also, if the cat or dog can watch the show, as you say they can at the moment, aside from the, color issue, which you mentioned, the lack of certain cones, it's not clear it even makes sense in any way.
Yeah.
Like certainly, obviously tracking larger objects, different predators, prey, threats in the environment, like this is animals organized this way. But, humans having a conversation in a sequence or what like an action movie would be, like this is just sort of incoherent to a cat or a dog for the most part because it's not an immediate threat. Yeah, as you said, the sound might be scary in some way, but it's like, oh yeah, I found the narrative here lacking. So it just doesn't really work for me. While that pet food commercial is more engaging, I don't know.
Maybe. And especially if it's like if it's animated, do they even have any ability to tell that like an image that to me looks like a cat even looks like a cat to them? Maybe they do, or maybe they don't. Maybe it relies on shortcuts that are uniquely human, or would there be other ways to sort of like simplify an image so that a cat could appreciate what it actually is, that it wouldn't mean anything to a human? Like, it's really hard to tell these things because we're not talking to our animals.
But, I mean, I have seen clips, and you never know if they're kind of cherry picked, that where it looks like an animal, like a cat is trying to hit the screen, attack the screen, or a dog is barking at something on the screen, not just because of the sound, because of what they see. And there was one that I love, this cat. So I'm watching an old movie. There's a scary scene. There's a relatively famous clip where the cat just kind of looks back and forth, and the eyes widen, and the cat it really gives the illusion that the cat fully understands what's happening in the scene, and they're scared like a person would be, because in the movie someone's attacked. And then when a human would go, the cat kind of like jumps away. It's pretty entertaining. Yeah.
So my cats definitely they like watching the motion on the TV. I don't think they understand what it is, but like my cat Siru, for example, he likes following the mouse pointer when I'm trying to work. It can be very distracting, and he photobombs on Teams calls and things like that. But on my TV, it's the same thing. If I'm playing a video game, it definitely follows the character, the playing character more. If there's a pointer or something like that, I follow it a lot. Or if it's a TV show, it depends what it is. But if there's a certain object that's moving against a stationary background, that gets the cat's attention a lot more than other things. So that's very cat specific behavior, as opposed to dogs, which I think are really, at least my brother's dog, he like looks at the animal and recognizes it as an animal. I've never seen my cats look at the TV and see a cat or even a bird or a squirrel and react in any different way than if it was just like an object that's kind of moving, right?
Right, like a either scared flight response or ready to attack response or anything else.
So this is all great, but what if your cat or dog are absolutely annoyed by the lights in your house? And this is a possible issue with certain kind of lights, right? So most bulbs are optimized for us humans. Like I mentioned, the electrical infrastructure is 60 hertz in North America. It's like 50 in Europe and other parts of the world. With old incandescent lights, it didn't really matter, right? So it heats the filament, and there's not enough time in 1/60th or 1/50th of a second for it to dim and then relight up again. So that lighting is constant enough that you don't notice the flicker in an incandescent. Like you mentioned, fluorescent lights, they can flicker. They usually have a frequency of 120 hertz, which is like double the frequency of the electrical infrastructure. So for us, it's fine. It might be a little perceptible to a dog. So if we're assuming they're kind of in the 70 to 80 range, it's still higher, but they might notice. So if you have an oil type of fluorescent and you kind of shake your fingers in front of it, you'll notice this sort of a strobing effect. You can do this in most monitors. You can do this in front of a TV or a lot of things. LEDs, they're closer to 200 hertz. So better for us, less likely to notice the flicker. Dogs and cats, less likely to notice the flicker there. But if there's a problem with the LED, or if it's a particularly cheap LED, there may be a flicker that's driving them crazy.
Which sounds like a nightmare scenario.
Yeah,
you're like sort of inadvertently torturing your pet here. That said, it does seem like a lot of pets, especially cats, they don't care about almost anything.
No, they don't seem to.
So if it is a strobing effect, they don't seem that bothered by it, or it's manifesting in ways that are not obvious to people.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like maybe you've got like one bulb in your house that has a flicker rate, and your cat just doesn't like that room.
Right.
When that light's on, and you don't realize that your cat just doesn't like to be in a certain room at a certain time of day or something like that. You might not notice. So this is probably more of a problem with like older or lower quality bulbs. You can look up like the flicker rate of your bulbs online and things like that if you want to. Some dimmable LEDs can be an issue. So on like incandescents, they don't work by like heating the coil less and glowing less. The bulbs basically turn off and on at a certain rate, and they stay off for longer if they want to be darker. So the flicker rate doesn't change as you dim it. It's just the amount of time that it's on for any period of time. And if that flicker rate is like slow enough that the pet could detect it, that dimmable LED could bother them. So you might be able to find the specs of your specific LEDs online if you're so inclined to really care, or if it seems that your pet is annoyed, or if you notice that there's a flicker rate that annoys you of your lights. Sometimes those dimmable LEDs, if they're not getting enough, like they're not getting enough current or something like that, if it's not the right one for that type of socket, or the type of dimmer you have, they can flicker and be basically malfunctioning, flickering at a rate that you will perceptively notice with your eyes, like 5 hertz or 10 hertz or something like that. Can cats and dogs watch TV? Well, they can see the image of a modern display, but that doesn't mean that they care all that much about what's on TV. That said, cats are often interested in moving objects, and dogs may be interested to see animals or something like them on the screen. Too bad they don't smell like anything.
Too bad. All those smells come through your TV in the future. Wow. Well, thank you, Adam. It is a curiosity, and I guess almost one would have to do personal tests with their own pet.
Yeah.
That's what most people want to know is like, does my pet understand what it's looking at if it's looking at anything? So then I guess you got to experiment and turn it off and on, have different shows and see if the pet reacts in any way and have some sort of test there. Because otherwise, cats and dogs are not entirely the same. I don't just mean cats and dogs, but within cats, there's many different types of cats, and within dogs, there's clearly many different types of dogs. And yes, they all are dogs and they all are cats, but there are differences within that range. And as such, some cats may be more capable than others and some dogs. So I would be curious if anyone has like, oh yeah, of course my dog always watches this show with me. They love it. You know, they love that Benji movie, you know, that sort of thing.
That's
or
cool.
maybe cats watching Hello Kitty and finding it enjoyable, even though the creators say it's not a cat. We all know it's a cat.
That was one of my potential segments. Hello Kitty is not a cat. Like, come on, let's not be silly.
Let's not be silly.
But yeah, there's definitely like within the cats I've had, they react differently to different kind of things on the TV, and that's.
Yeah.
It's just a quirk of that particular cat, I guess.
Well, let us know if your cat or dog enjoys a show, and if so, which show.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for joining us once again. I talked to you about Jean-Baptiste Lamarck and his theories of evolution, which are not entirely correct, but I think he deserves some credit for what he was able to achieve at his time. And Adam explored whether cats and dogs can watch TV. And the answer is maybe. Until next time, think better, act better.
Peace out, Cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
However, an injury forced him to leave the military, leading him to shift his focus to science. This injury was a turning point in his life, pushing him towards the study of medicine and botany. Thanks, injury.
Did he pass on his injury to his children?
For example, in the late 1700s, the Comte de Buffon conducted...
This guy's a clown.
I know. Charles Lyell. Yep.
Crocodile.
When Lamarck was working on hydrogeology, I guess I just say hydrogeology, I guess in English. Just a second. Nope.
No.
What again? Like what? Why? Why, Adam? Are you again? Why?
I got the impression that dogs didn't.
Wait. No, I might have been talking.
Okay.